Welcome back to the Chelsea Roar with me, your host, Ian the Dynamo Kelly, the Chelsea podcast by a fan for the fan. And today we've got a brand new series that we're going to run on the Chelsea Roar, which we'll do maybe one a month or one every couple of months. And we're going to call it the Legend Files, where we're going to look at a Chelsea player in history that we consider a legend. And we're going to go through their career and have a little conversation about it. And it's only right that I bring my brother in arms on, who is a Liverpool fan, but you know his face. He's on these shows all the time. Niall, because you did have a kind of a special upper tier kind of episode as well, where you look at Premier League legends. So yep. I suppose I kind of yoinked the idea off you, but I thought we'd do it in
slightly different way.
Yeah, just with Chelsea legends. And I thought you'd be the man to bring on today, purely because of the player that we can see in the background and talk about him. But before we get there, of course, this show is brought to you by the Dynamo Podcast Network, the only network in town. It's better than Netflix without the backing. However, we need your backing. So what you need to do is you need to like, subscribe, smash the bell notification on this show. If you like the rest of our shows, if you happen to be just stumbling across the show and you're a Liverpool fan or a United fan, or you're just a football fan in general, go check out all of our playlists. We've got something for everybody out there. Please find the show that you like, because we've got it. And all of our podcasts are available audio as well. So anywhere you listen to your favorite audio shows, we are there. And yeah, help us pay the bills a little bit, because your support means everything to us. But let's move into today, the first episode of the Legend Files, which I'm happy with that name, to be fair. Gianfranco Zola. Now, my God, Gianfranco Zola, born July 5th, 1966, is an Italian football manager and former footballer who played predominantly as a forward. He was most recently the assistant manager at Chelsea. Give a bit of background. He spent the first decade of his playing career playing in Italy, most notably with Napoli, with, in my opinion, the greatest player of all time, Diego Maradona, and Cerecha, where he was able to win the Serie A, and at Parma, where he won the Italian Super Cup and the UEFA Cup. So that's the intro. But here's the exciting part, because this is a Chelsea football podcast. He moved to Chelsea in November 1996, technically a January transfer window without the January transfer window build-up. There was no yellow toys or anything like that, but it was huge. Zola joined Chelsea for 4.5 million as one of the several continental players signed by Ruud Gullit at the time, including compatriot Gianluca Vialli, and was assigned the number 25 jersey. He made his debut in a 1-1 draw with Blackburn Rovers at Ewood Park, which I remember very well. In his debut season, he demonstrated the skill and talent to put in several notable performances, scored a series of memorable goals. This is the thing, memorable goals. In February 1997, after basically dancing around the whole Man United team in the penalty area, before he literally put a cheeky ball past the great Peter Schmeichel, he was described by legendary United manager Alex Ferguson as a clever little so-and-so.
So-and-so, yeah. Remember it well.
Yeah. Niall, you remember that goal well too. I mean, he done a lot to you boys too. I mean, let's bring you into this. I suppose I'll preface it as well by talking a little bit about his stats, just to give a background on him, because that's where we get the kind of the stats out for the stat people, because they're always watching. 301 appearances, 75 goals for Chelsea, which is phenomenal for a player of his magnitude. They weren't meant to be the out-and-out striker scoring, hundreds of goals. Parma, 149 appearances, 63 goals. Very interesting in a very tough Italian league. In his prime, obviously scoring a lot more goals. But then with Napoli, 135 appearances, 37 goals. With Cagliari then, obviously, at the end of his career, 31 games played and 27 goals. He scored a lot in Serie B. And then, of course, for the national team, made his debut in November 13th, 1991, under Arrigo Sacchi, legendary Italian manager who we all remember from the 1990 World Cup. 35 appearances and 10 goals. So that is your Gianfranco Zola stats. Stats don't tell the story in early football, though, do they?
No. And we'll get into it a little bit later on when we talk about his stats at Chelsea, because he should have scored so much more goals. And we'll get into what happened to the boy as his Chelsea career progressed. Through the Vialli era and through the Ranieri era.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he was unbelievable. He was a magician on the ball. I'm a Liverpool fan, but I love watching him, and he hurt my heart a few times. There's no doubt about that. I remember the back heel goal that he scored when he was in full flight in midair against us was unbelievable. But he was an incredible player, and it's no surprise he played a bit with Maradona, you know what I mean? Because he's every bit of Maradona, but just slightly lower, if you like, you know what I mean? But he was the modern day Messi back then, wasn't he? Really? And I mean, when you think about those goals he scored, they were all unbelievable goals. Like, this boy didn't score tap-ins too often, you know what I mean? It was always either one from distance, or it was beat a bunch of players to arrive at what we would call a tap-in today, But I always remember his movement across the ground and stuff like that. He used to tie defenses up in knots. And you mentioned that goal there, that goal against Manchester United, where he practically left half the back line on its ass. And it was incredible, you know what I mean? And he's just...
Remember Schmeichel got up and just went...
Yeah. And I mean, the ultimate compliment you'd ever get in football, if Alex Ferguson has called you a clever little so-and-so, you know what I mean? Because he was the bane of Ferguson's life at times.
He liked the Italians, didn't he? Ferguson also had a great quote about the great Marcello Lippi. It says, he's one good-looking bastard, didn't he?
You could always rely on Fergie for some of them, And of course, when you think about it, brought in by Ruud Gullit, I mean, what a player Ruud Gullit was, of course. But like 4.5 million, it's amazing when we look back at these and we go, you look at Keane, who came in for so little money, and Zola. Imagine trying to sign Zola today in his prime. I mean, when we talk about these £100 million players and stuff like that.
And also, Niall, a little thing as well that people don't realise, like Zola, also, as you can see in the background there, it looks like one of my spitting image of one of my favorite singers of all time, Steven Tyler from Aerosmith. Absolute image. I think it helps lend it. But when you look at Zola, right, he was 30 when he came into the Premier League. Nowadays, we write off 30-year-olds as like past it. And you're like, this guy was only getting started, coming into a league on a rainy night at every ground where lads were kicking the legs off you. What was your, as a Liverpool fan, I mean, this is your peak Liverpool years as a fan as well, watching the Premier League. What was this guy like when you first saw him? Because obviously people do count him as one of the top 10, and rightly so, Premier League players of all time. I think so, definitely, because you got to put history into it. Can't you just keep looking at the modern era of the Premier League? Got to look at what helped build the Premier League. And Zola, along with the likes of Cantona, Hullet, and players like that, are certainly have to be in the conversation, right? Bergkamp, of course.
Yeah, I think for me, he's one of those guys that I describe like a fine wine. He got better as he got older because he got cleverer. And he was always the danger. Like, anytime you come up against Chelsea in this period of time, it was always Gianfranco Zola. He's the guy to watch, He's the danger. He's the guy who'll either open up the fences for a player, or he's the guy who's going to walk through the fences and glide by them. But his close control on the ball, and, it's not unusual when you see him, like, he's very like Lionel Messi in his balance and his stature and stuff like that. And their close control on the ball and their balance on the ball and their way of putting you the wrong way or going through you without you realizing and all that kind of stuff. He was sublime to watch, you know what I mean? And it's just, it pains me when he gets into the later years at Chelsea, the kind of treatment, you know, like he got so less, you know, obviously Jimmy Floyd came in and was absolutely unbelievable. Good Johnson was unbelievable and stuff like that and all, but they kind of took him out of the team. And it always amazes me when I go back and I look at his stats. He should have probably would have scored so much more if you hadn't got a policy in there like Ranieri's policy when he came in, where he kind of ran those guys out of the club and he was trying to bring the age demographic down a lot and stuff like that. But this guy was the absolute beautiful white. He was the beautiful red wine on the table with the steak, and he deserved his positioning in the team and stuff like that. And I mean, even when he came on, even when he was being used on a sub like that, I mean, his stats stand up to today, you know. But I always look at it and I think, as much as I loved watching him, and it pained me to watch him being a Liverpool fan, but I love watching really, really good footballers in the depths of their art. And you know, he was a guy who worked hard as well for what he had. You know what I mean? I'd say there was a sprinkling of natural gift talent there as well. But I'd imagine he was the guy who was first man onto the training pitch and last man to leave.
Apparently, even into his 30s, he was still apparently back at the old Chelsea complex before Cobham.
Yeah.
He was still out there taking free kicks, and that's when the likes of Jody Morris and all, and John. Don't forget what this man impacted the culture of Chelsea as well. Because while we had the likes of the mad lads like Jody Morris going out and, you know, being young lads, and John Terry said himself, he started bringing them to opera. Like Dennis Wise actually told the story. He brought Dennis Wise and all those boys to the opera in London. And Dennis was like, "What are you doing, mate? I'm not into these bullocks." But he brought them to that, and they kind of saw a different culture. And I think the fact that you had Vialli and Hullet and all in there that were changing the culture of these young lads, it's really, that's where the modern Chelsea stemmed from with the likes of these Zolas. Because you look at Zola and he's just a nice guy. I mean, did you ever see him frown on a pitch? No. He barely got a yellow card. He got a fucking, in the 1994 World Cup, he got a straight red against Nigeria, which, like, nobody still to this day knows how. But, like, barely got a red card or a yellow card in the Premier League. I mean, all opposition fans absolutely loved him because he just get up, he'd get kicked and he'd get up with a smile on his face. And I mean, we talk about free kicks. I mean, this guy was the master of the free kick, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good
Absolutely.
Lord.
He was just sublime. And it's mad when you go back and you look at the teams he played in and stuff like that. You know, we harp on today about squads and stuff like that and how good, of course, your own Chelsea squad is and stuff like that. But this guy, look at who he played with. You know, he played with Dennis Wise and Gus Poyet and, you know, all these players, Frank LeBouf. He played with some exceptional footballers as well. Yeah, Desailly. And not to mention the likes of Dennis Wise and stuff like that.
Brian Lasso and all these lads. Yeah, great.
Well, he was really between himself and Hullet and Vialli when they came in. They were kind of laying the foundation, weren't they, for that kind of that movement out of that harsh English style of football into that kind of European football, that real appealing, romantic way of playing, but still hard as nails.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, a lot of credit has to go to Glenn Hoddle for that, because I mean he brought Ruud Hullet in, and Ruud Hullet said, like, you know, it was Glenn Hoddle that convinced him to come to that club in 1994, because obviously that was the year that Bergkamp came over to Arsenal as well, and you know they were the two London clubs that obviously were able to attract two big players over, and I'm sure we'll definitely do a Ruud Hullet episode on this show at some point. But you know, and that's why I'd like you to come on these particular shows, and we might be able to get other guests on too to talk about certain players. But you like this is literally the I suppose we're 2 years into the Premier League here in 1994, but then we're 4 in '96 when Zola comes in. This is a huge signing, and of course Sparky, he's playing with Sparky at the time as well, and he wins Player of the Year that year. You know, in a team that was finishing in the kind of upper echelon of the table, but still technically mid-table. it's amazing how players were judged back then. They were judged on the skill because nobody had seen it like this in England at the time, right? This was their very own Diego Maradona coming in because, I mean, you mentioned Zola, obviously becoming a smarter footballer in later years, very similar to Del Piero. After the injuries he kind of lost a bit of that pace, so they played a smarter game. And just these guys just change their level and love for the game. It's like, right, well, my game isn't based on pace anymore. So what do I need to do to improve myself? You know what I mean? It's not about the money. It's about the passion and love for the game. So I think everything you said is correct there with Zola. I mean, for me, this is my first proper footballing hero for Chelsea. You know what I mean?
These are the guys who laid the foundation. When we talk about the Zolas and the Bergkamps and the Henrys and all these kind of different players, these are the players that laid the foundation that became such a commercial entity as the Premier League.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because the Premier League, until it became very sort of like globalized and, all these names were coming in from everywhere, all these stars and the attraction of it and all, if it had to just stayed with that core kind of English thing, it wouldn't have become this commercial entity that it became. You know what I mean? Because, if you look at Italian fans are very staunch in their following of football and stuff like that. But the fact that Vialli was coming in and Gianfranco Zola and all these other Italian players, Ravanelli, I think at the time went to Middlesbrough,
Di Matteo, and Fabrizio,
absolutely. So this is what the attraction was, and this is how the Premier League became this global, massive commercial entity. Because you see it even today on any given week in the fixtures in the Premier League, how many different nationalities are represented. It'd probably be easier to say which ones aren't represented than what are represented at this stage.
Chelsea, I believe, were the first team ever as well to like field a team of full of internationals without a non-English player in there. And I remember at the time there was uproar. If you also recall that. And now that wouldn't even be a conversation or be allowed to be a conversation, and rightly so.
Yeah, but the beauty as well is the number of these players who came in as well, they also filtered down into the academies, and they also filtered down into the youth systems and stuff like that as well. So that's why we have so much youth coming through these days that have that kind of European flair about them as well. You know what I mean? They come out ready-made. Like, I'm looking at a guy like, if I could pay him the highest compliment, if you look at Harvey Elliott, who unfortunately got injured earlier in the season, but is on his way back. When you see Harvey Elliott in full flow with the ball and you see the way he does things and the way he gets kicked about that time against Burnley, and he just got up off the ground and he was laughing at these guys that were like 2 foot taller than him and probably 100 pounds heavier than him. The shades of Gianfranco Zola in there that you see, you know what I mean? And this is where the roots of something. You know what I mean? You can see it in players, How often do we message each other on a Saturday or on a Sunday and go, did you see that boy who was playing for Norwich or that boy that was playing for Crystal Palace, whoever it is? Do you not think he looked like Vialli then, or Gianfranco Zola, or whatever it is, you know what I mean? And that's where the reference points come from and stuff like that, So it's very interesting when we do look back on these legend files and stuff like that on these players. And it's important that we do it as well, because, not every viewer that views our shows and stuff like that understands the history that we understand that brings us to the dance where we are today. And that's why I was making the point earlier when we've often spoke about the strength of the Chelsea squad now, but look at the quality of the players in the Chelsea side back then. You know what I mean? So it's incredible when you think about it. Like imagine having a Ruud Gullit in your side now, or a Gus Poyet, or a Frank Leboeuf, or a Marcel Desailly, or a Claude Makelele, or whatever it is, you know what I mean? Michael Ballack.
Didier Deschamps. Imagine having
Didier Deschamps, who's I speak highly of him even when I talk on international football of France. He's the guy who squeezes the juice out of Pogba that no one else can. You know what I mean? So, and that's how I describe him, and that in itself is an incredible feat if you think about that statement.
Yeah, I agree. And it's kind of like we always allude to the fact that, and obviously anyone that watches this primarily is a Chelsea fan, and we always have this joke of, Chelsea have no history, and you're like, we're talking about history right here in the 90s, especially within the Premier League, and in terms of what we had, oh my good Lord, we did have And this also goes to Ken Bates as well. We gotta give Ken Bates a lot of props here, because Ken Bates was the one who fought the money out, and brought some of these players in. And when you look at, where you were getting the Michael Dewberrys and stuff like that, and I love Michael Dewberry, by the way, I think he was a great defender, but at the same time, they were brought up in the old school way. Frank Sinclair missed their own goal, but we still loved him. Always got an own goal out of Frank Sinclair. Just didn't know which was forward or back. I think he was a bit like Stranger Things, that he thought the upside was the fucking downside. People, proper Chelsea fans will know exactly what I'm talking about. But we loved him.
It's a great description.
We loved him. We had Ed De Hoy, the most weirdest looking goalkeeper ever. Hadn't got a hair in his head, big mustache, big lanky thing. But good Lord, he could make some great saves and then make some howlers. And I think that's realistically, when you look at that Chelsea squad, you're like, right, you were a goalkeeper away, and maybe like a centre forward, a 20-goal season centre forward away, of being in the top 3 throughout that 90s. I'm sure you would agree there. And obviously we did when Cutacini and all start coming in. But there you go. Yeah. You start looking at these youth players that Chelsea were bringing up, like Sam Dalabona, for example, who then went on to have a decent career with Atalanta. As you can tell, I subscribed to every Chelsea magazine, so I had everything. I knew exactly who these youth players were. I knew everything about the club, what was happening. I even had the balls one day to call Roberto Di Matteo's restaurant, because it was in a magazine once, and I asked to speak to Roberto as a kid. I think I was about like 13 at the time. And Roberto Di Matteo got on the phone. So I can actually say I spoke to Roberto Di Matteo once. However, it's not a good ending, because he hung up when I said, "How are you, Roberto?" It's Dino from Ireland. You can tell that I'm a bit of a prankster. But that's a true story, legit true story. On my first ever Siemens mobile. You remember the one?
Yeah.
But the point I'm making is, like, that signing of Zola and then Vialli coming in, like those two in particular, and Ruud Gullit. I mean, they're the 3, right? They are the 3. Obviously, they brought Di Matteo in for more money, but he was in the Italian national team, but he was a little less known. Now, his impact was phenomenal. You talk about Poya. I think Di Matteo's he was our guy in the midfield. Him and Wise playing together, I just thought was absolutely phenomenal. And this is the day of 4-4-2, where there were no other formations, right? It was like 4-4-2, man for man. Let's match up and see may the best team win. You could see also then that they embraced the Chelsea culture, that like tough London Chelsea culture, because you'd see the likes of Di Matteo go up against a Vinnie Jones and like go head to head and be like, "Yeah, I'm not afraid of you." And I remember actually seeing Vinnie Jones go, "Shit, this isn't working out." And Di Matteo pushed him and he fell in his hole, because he proper pushed him. And Jones was kind of like, "Oh, I'm not having any of that." What's the story with this? So it was like, it worked both ways, didn't it? Wisey and all these boys and Graham Lasso, who would have no problem smacking you on the pitch at the time, worked with the culture of the Italians and the some of the foreign Europeans or whatever it was that were coming in. They worked together, but then it also went both ways, and you could see some of the calmness then in the Chelsea players as it got on. So I think you're 100% correct, and I think Zola in particular deserves more credit than most for bringing that culture in there, because of how long he was there. Like, it seeped all the way down into the youth of that Chelsea football club, didn't it?
Yeah, well, he kind of like, if you're a youth team coach or an academy coach at Chelsea at the time, isn't he the poster boy that you put up on the wall for any of these underage players, and you're saying, this is what you have to be? You know what I mean? This is what you have to match up to now. This is the level. And I just think he was an outstanding player. There's no doubt about it and stuff like that. And it's just, as I said, when I go down through it and I see Ranieri's treatment of him and stuff like that, it boggles my mind as well, because when you think about it, in his last season at Chelsea, was his best stats, his best scoring return and everything and
Yeah.
all, you know. So he really was this fine wine. And I never understood, as well as you said, when they came in there and they bonded this culture between what they brought in from a European point of view and what Chelsea already had in there with the Wises and, you know, the Lassos of this world and stuff like that, and how it bonded together to come together. And remember again as well, you're talking about a period where you had a massive renaissance on an Arsenal side, on the other side, who were doing amazing things under Arsene Wenger and stuff like that. And you had the Petits and the Vieiras and the Pires and, you know, Overmars and Bergkamp and all these wonderful players as well. You know what I mean? So like there was big pressure on Chelsea back then as well, in terms of the whole London bubble, if you like, and what people were trying to achieve and stuff like that. But what was your feeling in terms of Ranieri when he came in that latter stages, and how he had that kind of, like, you know, if you were over 30 kind of thing, you were gone or you were benched or whatever it was. I thought it was kind of a weird approach. Not that I'm in any position to be questioning Claudio Ranieri in his thinking of football or anything like that, you know?
No, I mean, I can take myself back. I know you're talking, that was kind of like, especially near the end, because he brought, like, even when he brought Hasselbank in, Hasselbank and Zola in particular at the start worked off each other so well, because Zola was incredible. I mean, I'll give you an example. Like, we talk about Zola goals. People always talk about that little side flick in midair against Norwich in the FA Cup where it went past the keeper. And you're like, wow, like that. I mean, people forget about that goal. That's one of the best goals scored in English football, in any football, because the skill level required. Everyone knows how. Everyone has probably tried that little, when the ball comes in, you don't hit it with the initial foot and you kind of flick it and hope it goes past the keeper, and you're like deadly.
Yeah.
But I mean,
that Cobra Kai stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But if Lionel Messi scored this in midair and to go into the top corner at the same time, you're like, this lad premeditated this. Do you know what I mean? And knew exactly what he was doing. Another goal that stands out, if you remember the opening goal of the season when we signed Chris Sutton under Vialli in 1998, where Zola literally flicked the ball up like a little chip, and Poyet done that bicycle kick into the top corner. Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
That's his vision, because he just sees exactly where he's going, and he's like, boom.
Yeah.
And Poyet said that. He goes, I could try that and 20 times, 100 times, and that wouldn't go in. But he literally placed that in a place where I just couldn't do anything but belt it in that one direction. Like, just to go back to your point, though, to answer your question about the whole Ranieri thing. Yeah, I mean, look, Ranieri came in and he was obviously trying to. I mean, the most distraught I've ever been as a manager getting sacked was because I was a little bit younger. And you know, when you're younger, you take things to heart a little bit more. With Vialli getting sacked, that one broke my heart. But when Ranieri came in, I thought, right, cool. And initially it started off good. And I did like the way that Ranieri built up Goodjohnson. You know, he brought him, because obviously Vialli signed Goodjohnson from Bolton for $4 million at the time. And and I was very happy. It's mad I can remember these numbers straight away from, I can't remember yesterday, but I remember these things from childhood.
Because now they seem so ridiculous.
I know. $4 million for Eidur Goodjohnson. Good Lord. I mean, what? It was under $20 million for Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank. He was like 2 times top scorer, I think. But yeah, I mean, Ranieri used him sparingly. I don't know whether that was, I mean, it was definitely nothing to do with fitness, because, I mean, he was still the fittest man on the pitch. I mean, like, you look at the picture there where he has his arms were just chiseled constantly. He was always ripped to bits. I mean, he had, when Zola took his top off, you'd always see wear the little, you know, the little vest. But you could see the muscles bulging under it, even though he was a small man. The chap was just made from granite. And what I loved about him as well was, even when he went and played with the youth team one time coming back from injury, apparently all the youth team had the long sleeve jerseys and Zola had the number 25, but it was short sleeve by request. He refused ever to wear a long sleeve jersey. He was like, no, you man up and you go out and you let them, if you're not building a pump out, that's basically what he said. He goes, if you're not sweating out there and you need that to keep you warm, then you're not working hard enough. And I just thought, there's the mentality. Do you know what I mean? Constantly running in between the lines, looking for But yeah, no, Ranieri kind of did piss me off when he done that. Actually, a lot. And I mean, his last game ever. I mean, who will ever forget what he done with Jamie Carragher? No offense, but I don't think Jamie Carragher will ever forget it either. He talked about it, didn't he? And he said, "What could I do? Here's a 36-year-old man putting me on my arse. Like, just literally, where do you want to go? Where do you want to go? Oh, on the ground. See you later. Bye bye." You know. His last goal for Chelsea as well was unbelievable against Norwich 2. I think it was Norwich or Bolton, and when he hit that volley, that was his last goal ever for Chelsea. And I just thought, what a way to bow out. And the level of how much respect that this club had for this man tells it all. That Roman Abramovich, when he heard he was going to Cagliari and his word was his bond, offered 50 million to buy Cagliari just to get Zola back. You remember that? He actually, this is a fact, he offered 50 million to buy Cagliari because they were in Serie B and not in great financial health. And he offered 50 million to buy the club just so he could get Zola back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The one that always sticks out in my mind is the one on Easter Monday, the lob against Everton from outside the penalty area. And only because I'm a Liverpool fan, I'd remember it because it was against Everton, and it was just sublime. And I don't know, you could take 3 pairs of hands to count how many times he made goalkeepers look absolutely stupid.
He did.
And you were mentioning Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank there as well. How many times did he just put goals on a plate for that man like that? Like, you know what I mean? It was.
He tried to do the same for Sutton, but unfortunately Sutton couldn't cut the mustard. He only got the 3 after all.
Absolutely.
But he went on to have a good career with Celtic. So.
Yeah, but he was an incredible player. You know what I mean? He was just. It's just what we call sometimes it's those moments in history that we don't enjoy enough during the time. We enjoy it more when we look back.
Yeah,
and we didn't realize, the renaissance that these guys were bringing to English football at the time. Incredible player, incredible goals, incredible work rate. And I always remember, I know I'm harping on about that Ranieri era as well, but I always remember it was weird when you'd be looking at, one of those Monday night games at the Bridge that they used to, remember the Monday night football they used to do. Yeah. And it'd be a wet night or something like that. And he'd be on the bench with one of those big sort of bubble anorak coats on him and stuff like that. And it just never sat well with me, unless we were playing against you. Then I was happy if he was on the bench.
Didn't sit well with me either, brother. Didn't sit well with me either.
But I used to look at him, and he was never a man really, unless he scored, his expression in his face went crazy. But he was always in control of his emotions and everything and all. And you'd see him on the bench. And when you go back and you look at those old clips of him sitting on the bench behind Ranieri with the anorak on him, with the hood and all and stuff like that, and you could tell in his eyes that it wasn't right for him. In his eyes told the story. If you go back and look at his expression, that wasn't where he should be.
Well, that's it, because like he always said that this is his club. You know what I mean? Like, he fell in love with English culture, but most importantly, he fell in love with Chelsea Football Club. Yeah. You see Zola in interviews, he doesn't really, he talks about Napoli and Diego Maradona and Parma, and, but like, Chelsea's his team. You know what I mean? And that's, we done a show the other day, on the Celtic thing, and talking about, not being a local person necessarily, but then falling in love with a team from a different country. Here's a lad who was paid a lot of money to play in certain clubs and went to Chelsea and fell in love with that club.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we fell in love with him. I mean, we fell in love with him because of his outstanding ability, but it was reciprocated. It went both ways. You know what I mean? And
yeah. Well, if you remember,
that must have been tough for him. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. But if you remember at a time as well, I mean, Chelsea as a location as well was going through a huge renaissance in terms of cafes and bars and restaurants, and had a very European feel to it as well and stuff like that. and it developed. Even if you think about the way property developed in Chelsea and stuff like that, it became the go-to place in terms of lifestyle and
And it
everything
still
else. You know what I
is.
mean?
Like, you know what I mean? Yeah.
When you think about the Chelsea history on the back of the harshness of it and the, you know, the hooliganism and the fighting and all that stuff that preceded and stuff, that now it's a very Renaissance sort of
Well, it was
area. You know
always,
what I
to
mean?
be fair, the King's Road was always the rich part of London. It always was.
Yeah.
That's where all the rich people lived, and
Mm.
that's where the kind of the Millwall Chelsea rivalry came from, purely because
Yeah.
it's like, well, we're the fucking boys, we're the working boys, and but it was like, you knew that the lads that were coming representing Chelsea weren't living in these flats, you know, these beautiful complexes. They were like, that's our team, fuck you. You know, so but no, you're 100% correct. It was a very enticing place for these guys, and still is. I mean, Chelsea is, you know, they have a show made in Chelsea about it, and you see how they're all the real poshies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Zola for me. I mean, if he's not in the conversation as one of the all-time Premier League greats, then I don't think you really know what you're talking about. To be fair, we always hear Cantona, we hear Bergkamp and all, and we do hear Zola, but without a shadow of a doubt, in terms of that early marketing, as you said, that Sky and all that put into the Premier League and promoting it, Zola was pivotal and easily in the top three, you know, in that conversation. Again, he won the Player of the Year pretty much in his first year and playing with people like Mark Hughes. I mean, Mark Hughes said he loved playing with Zola because it was just goal scoring was goal scoring was easy to Mark Hughes anyway. Oh, good Lord,
much easier with Zola.
Listen, I think you could have, you know, you could have anybody playing beside Zola, and you know they'd find themselves scoring a couple of goals at top level football, just because it was there. Like, hit it.
And amazing this day and age as well, when we talk about the performance of players, especially forwards and stuff like that, we now put in tune goals with assists. And imagine how many assists this guy got back then. You know what I mean? Incredible.
They don't even look at assists back then, but I'd say he got say if we were to go back and count them, I'd say it's actually pretty astronomical.
Yeah, absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. But wonderful player. And I'd preface that by saying, if you're getting a show on our network here dedicated to you, you're definitely in the conversation from a Premier League classic player and stuff like that and all, you know what I mean? Otherwise, you wouldn't be getting a show dedicated to you. We don't give out these shows lightly.
No. And to be honest with you, the reason I chose Zola as the first is because he is the first. You know what I mean? He is. Listen, there's going to be the Peter Osgoods absolutely spoken about on this show. There will be, you know, Jimmy Greaves spoken about. There will be players like that. But in terms of modern football and the level, I mean, until Drogba came in, don't forget, and then Hazard, you know, surpassed Drogba, there was Zola. He was voted the greatest Chelsea player of all time after he retired by millions and millions of Chelsea fans. This was a vote. And I think now he stands at top three because Hazard eventually, you know, surpassed both of them. And some will say rightly so. You know, me too, in terms of when you look at what he's done, you're talking about literally one of the greatest Premier League players of all time. But I also think Zola's in that conversation without a shadow of a doubt in terms of what he's done. You know, Zola talked about Hazard as well and said how he reminded him himself when he was younger. And it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because you were looking almost at the modern version of Zola when Hazard came in. A few little differences, but, you know, similar height, similar stature, and looking at a player that didn't just take little tumbles or dives for, you know, for the sake of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so good Lord, Gianfranco Zola. That has been your first Legend Foils on the Chelsea Roar. And please do comment. Let us know your thoughts and opinions. I mean, if you've got a bad one, just don't post it because I'll delete it because you'll be wrong. I doubt anyone will, to be fair. The love for this man all throughout the Premier League and globally, I don't think you'll find an opposition fan that has a bad word to say about Gianfranco Zola, especially that grew up watching him in that era. It's the one Chelsea player that every single manager, opposition player, fan, everybody in unison just went, good Lord, that lad was just fantastic. So
It was unbelievable.
Unbelievable. Niall, thank you so much for coming on with these. I love this. I'll be more than happy to come on with certain players that you talk about on the Shankly sessions as well. I've watched many a great play for Liverpool as well. So I'd be happy to come on and talk about one of your boys as well at some stage.
Absolutely.
So thanks for coming on today. And of course, you can find Niall shows if you are a Liverpool fan and you're just a fan of football in general. Niall runs the Shankly sessions as well, which is dedicated to Liverpool, which in the same vein as this, but also runs the upper tier, which you definitely know if you're on this network because they have about 150 videos a day. And so there's something for everybody out there.
Yeah.
So,
if you're a football fan, we got you covered.
Yeah, you're definitely covered, man. And if you're a pro wrestling fan, you're pretty much covered as well. So, thanks, Niall. Once again, guys and girls, make sure that you do like and subscribe to this channel. If you're a Chelsea fan, please do help us build a brand. And in the bio, you'll be able to find all our socials and stuff like that. But also make sure that you tell your friends, Telegram, just don't tell anybody else, and let them know that your favorite podcast network is run by ourselves. We will have daily content as always. And please just continue supporting us because we appreciate it. But until next time, for me, your host, Ian Kelly, and for Niall Hogan, this has been your Chelsea Roar Legends. What do we call it? We're going to call it Legend Series. We may as well stick with it. The Legend Foils. I think so. The Legend Foils. But until next time, that's all we've got time for. I'm your host, and I'm over and out.